Picture this. You show up at the box office expecting a normal line, and instead you're staring down a queue that wraps around the block twice, phones out, everybody refreshing the same resale app at the same time, and you start wondering if you accidentally walked into the wrong event entirely. Except you didn't, because this is what happens now when Alex Eala's name shows up on a ticket page. And if you want to understand how a 20-year-old from the Philippines turned a midsummer hardcourt stop into the hottest ticket in Washington, you need to rewind the tape a few days and watch how badly the people running this sport misjudged her all over again. Because this isn't the first time it's happened, it's just the loudest. Start with the number that actually broke the story open. Within days of her signing on, the DC Open, one of the bigger stops on the American summer circuit, had all but sold out, and tournament chairman Mark Ine went on the radio and used the words, "very scarce," to describe what was left, somewhere around 97% gone. Not because of the marquee names splashed across the promotional poster, not because of the players the tournament built its entire campaign around, but because of the fifth name added to that list almost as an afterthought, tucked in under a line about a rising Filipino star. And once that news landed, it didn't stay contained to ticketing spreadsheets. It spilled straight into Filipino Facebook groups, family group chats, resale threads that lit up at 2 in the morning, people coordinating group buys like they were planning a reunion, not a tennis match. That's the headline nobody in the WTA's front office wanted to wake up to this week. The tour didn't sell out that stadium. A community did, ticket by ticket, refresh by refresh, while the marketing department was still catching up to what was already happening in front of them. To understand why this keeps happening, you actually have to go back 5 days earlier, to Center Court at Wimbledon, where the story that made all of this possible was still fresh enough to sting. Eala had just walked off the court following a 3-set battle against Jasmine Paolini, a match that stretched into the kind of tie-break tennis that makes commentators forget to breathe, and she lost it. But losing that match almost doesn't matter next to what happened 48 hours before it, because the round before, Eala had knocked out the defending Wimbledon champion, the reigning 3-time French Open winner, the player everyone assumed would cruise through that bracket without a second thought. That result is what turned her scheduled return tournament in Washington from a routine summer stop into an event people were suddenly desperate to attend in person. The tournament, to its credit, tried to plan around her, sort of. On July 2nd, DC Open released its promotional field, and the order told its own story. One headliner, then another, then Naomi Osaka, then Venus Williams, and only after all of that, filed almost like a footnote, Eala's name, described in the kind of language reserved for a promising newcomer rather than someone who'd just beaten a Grand Slam champion on the biggest stage in the sport. 9 days later, the tournament was scrambling to describe how little inventory was left. That gap, between how a player is marketed and how the public actually responds to her, is the pattern the WTA keeps refusing to learn from, and if you trace it back far enough, you start to see just how consistent the blind spot really is. Go back to January, the Australian Open, the very first round of the year. Eala was drawn against Alicia Parks, and tournament organizers slotted the match onto Court 6, a side court, small, built for undercard matches, not for a crowd that was about to show up in numbers nobody planned for. What happened next became its own small viral moment. Fans packed in far beyond what the court could comfortably hold, lines formed that had nowhere sensible to go, and outlets covering the tournament ran headlines calling it a straightforward scheduling failure, with some reporting fans were left standing because there simply wasn't room. That's what it looks like when a tour treats a rising phenomenon like she's still just another first-round name on the draw sheet. 2 months after that, at Indian Wells in March, the opposite lesson was sitting right there in plain view, and this time, at least one tournament actually noticed. Reporters on site describe her practice sessions drawing crowds that rivaled the ones following the biggest men's stars in the sport, while players ranked inside the world's top 10 were pulling only a scattering of fans on the courts next to her. Think about that for a second. A woman ranked outside the top 30 at the time was outdrawing top 10 men just for a practice session. That's not a fluke, and it's not ordinary fandom either. That's the kind of gravitational pull that reshapes how an event should be planned, and an Indian Wells executive said as much out loud, on the record, telling reporters the tournament welcomed the crowds, benefited from them, and leaned into promoting the moment rather than trying to manage it down. Tournaments, same player, completely different read on what was unfolding in front of them. One tucked her onto a side court, the other built its marketing around her pull. Then came Wimbledon, and the moment that made ignoring all of this basically impossible. Court 1, a tiebreak that dragged all the way to 11-9, a third set that swung the match, and a result that knocked out the defending champion and 3-time French Open winner in one of the most talked-about upsets of the tournament. The same player who'd been boxed into a side court in January was now the reason officials had to reshuffle their entire schedule in July. And here's the part worth sitting with if you're one of the people who's been saying her name for the last year, telling co-workers to remember it, staying up late to catch scorelines from time zones that made no sense. You weren't overreacting. You saw this before the seeding committees did. The Filipino community, from Manila to Dubai to Daly City to Alexandria, Virginia, had already clocked what was coming long before the rankings caught up to confirm it. Which brings the story back around to that July radio interview. Chairman Mark Ine describing scarce availability while, behind the scenes, Filipino diaspora communities were organizing group purchases and resale prices kept climbing, turning what was originally slated as a WTA 500-level event into something that started to feel less like a neutral American tournament and more like a home match being staged thousands of miles from home. And if the tour needed someone with enough credibility to translate what was actually happening, it got that voice months earlier from arguably the biggest name the sport has ever produced. Novak Djokovic, record Grand Slam champion, more weeks at world number one than anyone in the history of men's tennis, someone who has watched decades of next big things get built up and discarded and knows exactly what real, organic demand looks like versus a marketing push, was asked directly about the crowds following Eala earlier this year. His answer was simple. He called it a good problem to have. Sit with that phrasing for a second. The most decorated player in the sport's history looked at a 20-year-old's fanbase and described it not as a distraction, not as a scheduling headache, but as the kind of problem every tournament should hope to have. He named it outright, months before Washington's ticket scramble made headlines. And the tour has spent every one of those months since proving it still hadn't fully absorbed the message. Because this isn't a one-off story that ends in Washington, it's a preview of an entire summer that's about to test whether anyone in charge has actually learned anything. In early August, the tour moves to Toronto for the National Bank Open, a city home to one of the largest Filipino-Canadian populations anywhere on the continent. From there, it's on to Cincinnati, and then late August brings the US Open, where projections already have Eala seeded somewhere around the high 20s. 3 more tournaments, 3 more chances for the tour to either get ahead of the demand this time or repeat the same mistake in a bigger stadium with more cameras pointed at it. And underneath all of this sits a demographic reality that isn't going away anytime soon. The Philippines is a nation of roughly 115 million people historically built around basketball, and it's converting to tennis in real time, match by match, headline by headline. Add to that the diaspora spread across California, Nevada, Virginia, Ontario, and communities throughout the Gulf region, and you're looking at a fan base the WTA has never had meaningful commercial access to before. Not like this. A Filipino sports journalist summed up the emotional weight of it plainly in an interview, explaining that the country had been waiting for its next Manny Pacquiao-level figure, someone whose matches could stop traffic and empty streets the way Pacquiao's fights once did. That's the scale of what's building around Eala, and the DC Open scramble isn't the ceiling of it, it's the floor. None of this has come without a cost to the player at the center of it. Back on center court, just 2 days after the win that appended the tournament, her serve looked uneasy, and she was seen wearing preventive tape on her forearm, later explaining it was more precautionary than anything, chalking it up to a long season finally catching up with her body. She dropped that third set against Paulini 6-3, and afterward, in the press room, she offered a line that reframes the entire story far better than any ticket sales statistic could. She said that if she's able to face those moments with courage, with a level head, and with real intensity, then she can look back without any regret, adding that everyone has days where their best tennis doesn't show up, and that's simply part of the job. Whatever regret the WTA might be quietly sitting with over how badly it's mismanaged the scheduling and marketing around her, Eala has already told the world, in her own words, that regret isn't something she plans on carrying. Run the timeline back one more time and it practically writes itself. A side court in Melbourne back in January that couldn't hold the crowd that showed up, a practice session in March that pulled bigger numbers than top 10 men on the courts next door, a 3-time major champion falling in July, a tournament chairman describing ticket scarcity on live radio, the sport's most decorated player naming the phenomenon before officials were willing to say it themselves, and a 20-year-old walking off the most famous court in tennis refusing to hand a single ounce of her career over to regret. The tour didn't fill that stadium in Washington. The fans did, 1 resale ticket, 1 late-night group chat, 1 desperate refresh at a time, and every seat this sport ever tucked her into on the wrong court is coming back around now, at full price, with interest attached. So here's the question worth dropping in the comments before the US Open draw comes out next month. Does the tour finally learn from 3 straight scheduling missteps and hand her a marquee night session on the big stadium court, or does it repeat the exact same mistake one more time, shove her onto a side court, and watch the line wrap around the grounds all over again? Make your prediction now, before the seedings are announced, because if you're the kind of viewer who called this shift back when she was still buried on court 6, you already know how this pattern tends to play out. And if a tournament underestimates her again this summer, this channel is going to have that story ready before the press release even goes out, so stick around for it.